It should be starting. It should be starting soon. We have some technical things to figure out, and yeah, not even technical difficulties, just the nature of it's a weird con. Yeah. Enjoying the con so far? Ow.
I love music, like 50 years.
I don't know how to dance.
It's okay, I can't dance.
Some people are good at dancing. I have my own skills. That's like just kind of shame. You're in the dance floor and all you can do is like MLA style citation formatting. You can't really do that during the dance floor, and that's a bit part of life. Hello?
Yeah, careful where you run.
I don't want to get a seizure on stage. That's
All I did was look at
yeah, no, I can always pretend to be the DJ and like. Sometimes they dance, and then they. Yeah. The bit where it just has that moment where you just it's very intense and it just slows down. It goes. And you just have the time to go with the audience say go. Yeah. That I was thinking of that, but I was also thinking of the one presentation when they announced Skyward Sword for the Wii, and they had some struggles because of all the equipment that was there for the press. I was thinking, like, what if you try to do some kind of rave and all the equipment and all the sound is so loud that it somehow interferes with the... it just doesn't work. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I think I have some sound. I do. So do I have to go to be able to go with the start with the panel? Perfect. So welcome to Behind the Animation Era with Minty Root. You'll never guess, I'm Minty Root. So you might recognize some of my work. I worked on a couple of things. For example, those live action movies, those animated productions. A lot of things I can't talk about because of my NDA, but in this particular case, a couple of pony projects. Funny thing, one of the animated productions that I worked on ended up being less media because of corporate BS. And thus, the only material that has come out of it is the material that I didn't get to work on because I was working on QC, and the only work that got shown is the work prior to QC. So it's quite interesting. Animation errors have been a thing that's been quite interesting. I've been working in QC with animation production, so I've been able to have a good glimpse at how animation errors come to happen. And the thing with animation errors with a show is that a lot of people think about G4 because of that. It's not something that has happened only with G4. It's something that has happened since the very beginning of the franchise. And one thing I want to cover really quickly as we start is just to give you a good idea of the sheer scale of the production of the show. So this is just the intro for The Return of Harmony, and each of those frames is a singular shot. And as it keeps going, you get a good idea of how many shots are involved. And all of those shots are a single setup that you need to get with all the characters. You need to animate them, but you need to put them on backgrounds. You need to prepare the rigs to work for the animation. And this is for 80 seconds, you get 21 shots. So let's do the math quickly and let's count all the shots we have within a single episode. So one episode, I did the count, is about it's on average 320 shots. It didn't vary that much from season 1 to season 9. They kept very consistent with that. One season has 26 episodes, so for a single season of TV shows, you have about 8,320 shots per season. And think of it for a second. We've had about one season a year. We had some hiatuses that were worse than others, but on average, one season a year, which means that, per year you get about 33 shots per day to work on. So you get to see a lot of errors that just pop out. And the thing with animation errors is you have to think of it like an iceberg. All the animation errors that we've seen are the ones that didn't get patched. So you can get a good idea of all the errors that they did catch before airing. One of the most famous ones, of course, Jason Tyson talked about that one, derpy hooves. And it's quite interesting because he talked about an animator who snuck that in. And the theory that I currently go with as to why this happened is not really an idea that derpy was a mistake that happened. Derpy was perhaps perhaps the whole idea was derpy was not supposed to be seen in the frame, and they realized while doing the shot that they needed to go a bit wider because, as the saying goes, tragedy is a close-up and comedy is a wide shot. So they realized like, let's widen a bit the shot because as Twilight is drinking the hot sauce, she's gonna have a very, very explosive reaction that requires a wide shot. And they probably realized like, let's not try to do a shot that just goes from close up to wide with a zoom because it wouldn't work. And the interesting thing that I want to cover is not just derpy, is that a lot of people don't point it out. Lemon Heart in that same shot as Grey Lips. And I think the theory as to why that happened, it's a bug that happens that is really frustrating with Flash. Whenever you have to recolor things, you have it's Control F just to find and replace. You take every instance of a single color and you swap it. Unfortunately, for some weird reason, it tends to skip some colors, even though it's the exact perfect X value for that. I think it's just coding because Flash is a piece of software that has been going on since the 90s, so some of its particular weirdness has never really been patched. So of course, when I redid that scene when I redid that scene for Missing Out, I didn't keep Lemon Hearts having Grey Lips. I kept Derpy Hooves because Derpy is the one animation error that we like to keep. It's the one character that really the fandom really likes, so it makes the most sense that we keep that as a mistake. And here's the funny, kind of ironic twist in this scene. You might see an error that I slipped in by mistake in that shot. Do you want to take a guess at what mistake I did in that shot? That also did in a couple of other shots in that sequence? Nobody? Okay, so the funny thing is that Starlight Glimmer doesn't have that eye color. She doesn't have light blue, cyan eye color. She has something that's closer to deeper blue. And the reason why it didn't catch it, for one, is that it matches with the highlight on her hair. But it's also the fact that I didn't catch it because of a synchronization issue with the way that I did the rig that was based on my Sunset Shimmer rig in the Fall of Sunset Shimmer. It just took that color while I was trying to transfer the rig. And sometimes software has that particular issue. Sometimes you're going to get some weird things. In this case, it's Toon Boom, but in Flash, you get some weirder things like this. Where you have Cheerilee just missing a face while she's walking. Would you like a demonstration of how that kind of mistake can happen? So, I will open up Flash. So, not this one. So, here's just a walk cycle with Derpy, and of course I went with Derpy because. So, a particularity with that is if you go with the walk cycle is a 24 frame loop. And the whole idea is that whenever you see a character that is walking, unless it's a dance or something very specific, that walk cycle will always be the same, and you simply swap the head, and the head has its own movement. But the thing is that the head is its own separate symbol that you get to go in. And you have here the looping options. You have play graphic ones where it just goes once and stops at the end. And you have the loop. And one of the things when it stops, for example, I'm going to replicate the one of the mistakes that could happen. So if I just select some of the elements of the head and I just extend those, one of the particularities with Flash is that when you extend some elements, if you have some, for example, if you have some keyframes that end here, you're going to think, what happens after that? And I will show you very quickly what kind of occurrence you're going to get out of it. As the cycle keeps going and the cycle has been synchronized to keep going, at some point as the animation ends, there's just nothing, just because the particular approach is that it just doesn't show the symbol if it ends here. And that's the proper way for it to work, because it just assumes that once you don't want the keyframe to show up, you don't want it anymore. And sometimes you're going to get things like Cheerily just not having a face. Sometimes you will get some weirdness, which is not due to the clip just ending there. You have the option to make it play graphic once, and sometimes you'll have the option to play it in loop. And sometimes people would go with loop because it's one of the default options. It makes the most sense. And the problem with when you have a loop option, let's go with this and let's synchronize. Just to give you a good idea, so you have all the frames for the head, and what they usually do is that they have a part of the timeline that's kept for just a reserve for all the other angles. So you have that turn here because they keep the head, all the angles of the head in the same symbol, because it's a lot easier if you have a character who's turning their head while animating. You don't have to switch the whole symbol and have to worry about synchronization. So one of the things that happen is that if you set it to loop, you have the character who's just walking normally, and then the head just spins in the craziest manner, all because you didn't consider that part. And sometimes one of the things that happen is that a lot of those errors, for example, Cheerily, there always happens at the end of a clip. And one of the big mistakes a lot of us do in the industry is that we just check the beginning of the clip and we don't really think of looking at on it until the end, because we don't think that the error would happen at the end of the clip, because usually the biggest errors happen at the beginning. And it's one of those cases with one of the errors that has also been very, very famous. The one with the little guy on the right that's a bit scary. So let's just show you a bit what also happened. So what you have is that you have all the angles. For example, in this case, you have a profile view. So you have the profile view and you just go with those. And let's say that you want to change the head angle. Usually the approach is that you copy all the head angles and you go with this. And that's it. You have the character turning the head and that's it. But one of the problems that happen if you just forget to synchronize all the symbols of the head, and you just, let's say clear keyframe in this case, you just have some kind of weird composite of face that just looks like a cyclops, which is terrifying. And that's why I think animators just need a lot more praise, because they see some nightmarish things in their work, and that all of that nightmare happens to be all of their NDA, so they can't even talk about that to people that they care about. So just to give you the idea of how nightmarish things get turned into. So we have other things. For example, in this same clip, you don't see that this guy here, his lips are brown, all because this is technically just a reskin of a Doctor Who's rig, and they probably realize that it's easier to just reskin, just change the color, change the cutie mark, and that's it. But sometimes you have the color synchronization system that just doesn't work for one piece, and it happened to be the mouth here. So, and in this case, it could always just be that the color is slightly off, because the color picker sometimes messes up. So You have other errors that are a bit simpler. For example, you have just layering issues, which is just a result of what happens when you don't name your layers, which I'm also guilty of. Sometimes you have things. This shot, for example, the one expression I've heard back in the days, it was used to describe one of the problems that they had with developers working for the Atari VCS. It said that premature optimization is the root of all evil. I don't think it's the root of all evil, but it's the root of a couple. For example, this shot, they had the close-up where you had Luna just talking with Celestia about how sorry she felt about all the things. And I think they realized that it was a bit too tight as a shot, and they realized, let's widen the shot. And one of the optimization issues that they had is that they didn't have legs for Celestia. And now Celestia looks like a swan. Sometimes you have things, for example, you have this design for Luna, which is not the design that we have now. You have one of the things that they did was that they had the switch in Luna Eclipse. But the prior plan that they had for the episode was they're supposed to go with the original, the new design for Luna in a Canterlot wedding, and they decided to change that all the rigs for the episode while all of it was animated. And my best guess for why that happened, the idea was probably that they realized let's go with the new design right now, so the audience is not going to be too confused when the Canterlot wedding happens. It's more fitting for her to have the new design as she returns, so it doesn't feel too jarring for the audience. So they had to switch back all the pieces. They could do the color switch with the find and replace tool, which works perfectly fine because all the rest of the rig just the same shape. They just resized it a bit. And you have things, for example, the main, which they could just replace, and the main is the simplest thing. It looked very complex, but it's simply a 40 frame loop that just keeps going, so you just have to keep using that loop. So it's just swap the main pieces with that. The problem is that while they had to do, in this case, it's per episode's 320 shots, so let's assume that it's half of those just Luna being in the frame. It's over 100 shots that you have to switch, and sometimes mistakes happen. In this case, you have shots where you have Luna, where a piece of the original main just shows up, and you see the color here. In the second case, you have Luna. Turns out the main was animated, so all the frames add a bit more of motion. And my best guess is that they didn't catch that the main was not supposed to have a different color. Sometimes you have animators who don't realize it because one big problem you have in animation studios, the problem with communication. You have a lot of people who need to be briefed about things, and some people, they have meetings and they can't be all briefed at once. You can just send an email to everybody. And even if you send an email to everybody, you don't know if they're all going to be reading it. And with the crunch time they have to get a whole season of television, sometimes mistakes happen with those shots. And it's not really that big of a deal. Like, would you prefer to have a series that plays it safe where they don't have errors and they don't really do anything special? Or would you want a show that really tries to go try to do very crazy things, and sometimes that has hairs. Sometimes you'll have problems. For example, you have a shot where you have just placeholder cutie mark because you just reuse their rigs, and they get some of the assets of the original rig keep going, and sometimes you're gonna realize like where's the cutie mark, and then you realize like I need to find back the ref sheet for the character. I need to figure out who designed it, and sometimes if the studio is big, you'll have a nightmare trying to find the person who did it. And sometimes they'll realize like there is no cutie mark design for that, but we can go with blank flank. And they realize like it's a very short shot. They won't worry too much about it. It's television, so it's not like we have the kind of scrutiny that nowadays we do because we have the streaming era, so people can pause. But back in the days, the idea of pausing on a live broadcast was a bit, some people did, but it was not the expectation. So sometimes you would just have those assets just pop up for a couple of frames, and a couple of frames is less than a second. So it's probably a blink of an eye. And personally, I never saw that when I saw the episode air the first time. So if I did not catch it, even if I'm in the industry, I think most people wouldn't catch it. The only thing is that bronies are very, very particular about details, so we did catch it eventually. And there's also the fact that there's a lot of eyes just pointing at the screen at different areas. I mean, and usually sometimes you'll just find that someone will just blink at the right time and spot it. Sometimes you're gonna get things like this. Do you catch it? Exactly. You don't catch it really quickly. You have this area here where you have that little gap that shows up for a couple of frames. And sometimes you get just that. You just have that thing that just shows up very quickly so people don't realize it. And it's not like it breaks the animation. Sometimes you'll have very funny faces. In this case, it's the same thing as the Pony Cyclop, where you just have someone who left a placeholder frame a bit too early in the sequence, so it still shows up. And sometimes you have shots that they think that will cut a bit early because of the editing. And in this case, they didn't realize the head that they placed that they were expecting for something else would just show up in this one. And one thing that's interesting is that you don't really tend to see those errors whenever you have a shot that has a lot of polish. For example, the crystal ponies that required, in this case, they required to split the layers of the render and then composite it separately in After Effects. So since you had more people with more eyes that could just catch those errors, you had a lot more opportunity for them to fix them. And of course, catching the error is one thing, fixing it is another. And if you don't have lots of time to fix it, sometimes you can't afford to fix it. And sometimes you just have to accept that there's going to be mistakes. People pointing mistakes, for example, the goof section of IMDb will not lower the grade. It's not you won't get people saying like, I'm not going to go watch the movie because there's continuity errors in it. They're just going to not watch it because they think it's bad. So this is the result. In this case, it's Flash Professional 8. It's a software from 2004 or 2005. It's very old. You're going to take a lot of those were due to Flash not really being meant for animation. A lot of Flash is just the result of people. Flash was made for web content. Some people realize that it's very good for vector animation, but it's it's really pushing it for the style of MLP. For example, just the fact that the rigs, you don't really have an option to tie them together in a way that the piece would be puppeteered. So you have to have pieces that are just separate. Sometimes you'll get the gap, for example, with Rarity, just because the pieces are not meant to stick to each other. But let's go with something a bit more modern. I'm going to skip the MLP movie because the MLP movie doesn't really have a lot of errors. Part of it is just that they had more budget, shorter runtime, more scrutiny time with the animation. So there's not a lot of things. Like sometimes they have a character with different eye color than expected, and that's it. So let's jump right away with just Maya, for example, with the making of Baker Mark. I will skip the movie because that one also had a lot of opportunity to fix things. Sometimes you had characters just one of the characters I'm thinking of that had just no face because the rig was just not rendered properly. But it's something that you could only catch in the background of one shot very quickly, so it's not the end of the world. But one example, it's not really an error. It's the idea of jazz hooves not having ears. And it's already been covered by Schnookum's gal, someone who worked on Maker Mark. And basically she covered the idea that the design of the hair was so big and they wanted to avoid clipping with the ears. So they just realized, like, let's go without the ears because the clipping issues. And it's quite interesting because just like Derpy Hooves, a lot of fan art was done, sometimes funny, sometimes cursed, and sometimes wholesome. It's quite interesting because, sometimes you can try to make the best of a silly situation like this. Sometimes you'll have things like, in this case, you have one of the examples they had with character just in this case it's supposed to be a cell phone, but the cell phone was missing in the version of the scene that they had for the trailer. They fixed it for the episode, but one of the problems that they realized is that they didn't have the phone. People were wondering, like, did they just not animate it with the phone in hand, which would be really weird? No, as it turns out, they forgot the layer of the phone, and the way that Arnold works is that you can tell it to render a separate part of a scene on a separate layer, but the elements that are behind it are not going to be rendered because in some cases you don't need it. So one of the things you get is you'll have each part of render set separately. And the whole idea with that is that, for example, if you realize that Sunny is a bit too warm in terms of color, you could just tweak the color just on her. You could, for example, isolate an element. For example, the magic effect she has as an alicorn is going to be a glow, and you composite it differently from everything else because it's supposed to be glowing instead of just being pasted on. And then you have the background, and in this case, for example, the background has a bit of depth of field, and if you want a bit of depth of field, you can just blur the background separately, and that's it. And you can basically just get away with a lot of things, and one of the problems you get is that the compositing setup just results, it's a lot of nodes. Pretty sure they use Nuke. They could use After Effects too, but in the case of Nuke, it's more fit for 3D productions. So it's a lot of nodes of things that you plug in things, and sometimes you don't plug the right thing in the right place, and sometimes you just have a layer that's just missing, and instead of just not showing, instead of just showing a grayscale checkerboard pattern that just says, I am not, like, there's nothing here. Some people would just set it to just render nothing. So if the element is missing, you'll just get the element missing in the comp. And you don't realize it because you don't have a lot of time. You have 320 shots that you have to prepare for tomorrow, and sometimes you have to just push them. Sometimes it's just the server has problems accessing one of the files and just gives you a shot that has almost all of it, and sometimes you realize too late and you just have to keep going. And sometimes it's just people don't catch it because it's in a very quick edit. Sometimes you'll have, in this case, it's quite interesting because the fur is not technically connected, like parented to the character animation. And one of the reasons why is that sometimes fur has some very particular requirements. So what they would have is a synchronization tool. And the whole idea with the synchronization tool is it just takes the animation and it basically bakes the fur with the exact motion. And if you can look at the fur, it's slightly off, and my best guess with that is they realize, like, we need to move a bit zip for the shot. And as they move zip for the shot, they realize, like, they didn't realize that we need to also update the fur animation. So it just feels like, in this case, like she exfoliates a bit too much. And it looks very crazy. If I recall, they also had the time to fix it for the episode. And sometimes it's just that people don't get to catch it in time because sometimes it's an automated process. Sometimes you'll have, and this one's quite interesting because I was paid to fix that when I was on Scoob Holiday Hunt. You have eye clipping in this particular case with Izzy, where you see that the eyelash is clipping to her eye around this area. And one thing that you, when you're paid to fix those mistakes and to spot those mistakes, you see it everywhere. So you really have that kind of clipping, and usually that kind of clipping, since it's very specific, sometimes it's a blink, so you blink and you miss it, kind of situation. Sometimes you'll have you just don't have the time to fix it because you need a whole department of QC artists just there just to fix it, and sometimes you'll have just that kind of weirdness where you just have to accept that sometimes the characters will blink a bit weird, and that's it. And the fix usually for that, for example, the one here, one of the things you can do to keep the animation that looks the same is that you can just push it a bit forward at the camera, and since you don't really see any depth to it, it just works as it's layered. It feels like it's layered below. Sometimes they'll have really weird ones. This one is due to the way that they do motion blur. So if you look at this area here, you can see that somehow as the hoof goes fast, it just motion blurs the background behind it. And the whole idea with the way that they do motion blur is that they just take motion vectors, and basically motion vectors is a map, and the color represents the speed and the direction that pixels go at. And the whole idea is that you then take that, and since you need motion blur to make it look good in 3D, what you do is that you just smudge you basically blur it in the direction of that blur. And the problem is that in this case, it just had the background and the foreground, the hoof, on the same layer, so they couldn't extract it properly. And one of the problems you get is that you get really weird smudging in some areas very quick. Sometimes it's especially chapter 1 that had some egregious examples of that, because sometimes they didn't have the time to split the renders to render them properly. And of course, there's something that's just even more obvious than that. You can see here, that area here, that's really weirdly low res compared to everything else, and that area as well. And the reason why it's even simpler than that, when you have shots that are set up in Maya for artists, what you don't see is that, because rendering takes a bit of time to do. We're getting better with real-time rendering with ray tracing. The problem is that they don't see this. They see a weird grayscale version with very simple shading that has no textures, and you just see the piece with the outline and just the silhouette that it will make on the screen. And you might not realize that the texture is a bit too low res for the needs, and they probably realize, like, if it's too low res, we might have some time to fix it. And due to the nature of being on TV, they don't have the time to fix it. So, well, I say TV, Netflix, but that's the same thing. Sometimes they have interesting things. There was this scene that I was thinking of, and while I was thinking of this scene, I realized another mistake that's even more obvious. You see the reflection doesn't match. And the simplest way to approach it is simply that the background sometimes is rendered before, because they simply assume that the background won't change, but the character animation might. And the thing with the background is the reflection is also tied to the background, so being tied to the character. So if you update the character, you'll need to update the background too. Sometimes it just takes too much. So you'll have the hoof that's probably been updated because they realized that they need to update the animation, so they updated the hoof position as well. That doesn't match anymore. And you can see also that it also applies to shadow, so it's pitch black because it shouldn't have any light coming here. But the one reason why I was thinking of that scene was not that, is this one where you realize while looking at the railing that the polygons pop in this shot. And then you look back at the previous shot and you're thinking, oh, the previous shot it was perfectly round, right? Right, but there's a massive gap here. So you're wondering, why is it like that? And as it turns out, the reason why it's like that, it's called Catmull-Clark subdivision. The idea is that you have an element you want to have an element with a lot of detail, but you don't want to have a lot of polygons to consider, because it's a lot of data to consider. And sometimes you have, if you have a simpler model, it's easier to adapt later. So you have a model, and what you do is that the way you subdivide it, and then you basically do interpolation between the positions of all those points. So you have those polygons that are very sharp, and what you do is that you have another point that's in between that has the position that's interpolated between the two. And the whole reason why it's like that is that you see that because of the interpolation, because of the smoothing involved, you have a gap here that you couldn't see here, because people might have been working with low poly models and just didn't realize at that point that because of the low poly nature, that this point here wouldn't be lining up in the subdivided version. And it's quite interesting because I was talking about this. The technique has been talking about this and making papers about this since the 70s. You have the recursively generated B-spline surfaces, and it's a long text just for how to smooth models with big polygons for TV from Ed Catmull and Jim Clark. And you might recognize Catmull. He founded a little company that you might have heard of called Pixar. So it's quite interesting to see all that technology that's been dreamed up in those times when the computing power was just not there yet, and we can see the result we have here. And all of that time that's been set to think of all those ideas, and now we have to rush through things with those algorithms just because of those crazy production schedules, just to get people to get to watch a show at the time we have. So it's one of the reasons why I think we shouldn't worry too much about hiatuses. The idea that the next season got to take a while to get there, we should appreciate what we have. We shouldn't push too much studios to try to get there at the last minute. Sometimes you'll have errors that also pop up. In this case, in the 2D TV show as well, into the 2D show, you have more contextual ones that it looks perfectly fine until you realize that Sunny didn't get a rainbow stripe in her mane as a foal. She got it at the end of the movie. And my best guess as to why this is like that is that they most likely just reused part of the mane that they had for the adult version of Sunny, because you can see that their hairstyle is the same all over. Yep. And they didn't scale up the head itself. They probably had already full models. You can see that the ear is quite different. It's a lot more rounded. But what they do is that they just transpose assets from one to the other, and it just works fine. It didn't have the issue with Maker Mark, because in this case with Maker Mark, when they flashback, they already had models for what Philly Sunny Starscott would look like, so they didn't have to worry too much about that kind of thing. Sometimes you'll have things that are more contextual but could be explained through different means. For example, if you look at, it's kind of a spoiler, but if you look at the castle that Opaline was in, if you compare the model that they showed in the intro and the model that they had for the final scene, you can clearly see that the bridge is completely different. And one of the reasons why is that the bridge that they had as a 3D model is not based on the one that they had, because the one that they had was just a matte painting, and they probably realized that they wouldn't be showing that whole castle in 3D anyway. And it's quite interesting because you can clearly tell that they realized too late in Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 that they would need a 3D model, because they had some very, very basic exterior shots just for the close-ups of the windows, and you could tell that they had to do it quickly. At least it works perfectly fine in context, not something that will be jarring to people. It's just the idea that you have lots of things that you have to consider. With Maker Mark, you had, well, not even Maker Mark, with a new generation, you see Sunny's house. Sunny's house was simply a matte painting that they had because they only had one shot at the exterior and that's it. And that they could just worry about the interior on its own separately. And when you came back to Maker Mark, they had to make a 3D model based on matte painting, and you can a bit tell the difference in quality. So you can see a bit what happens when you don't have a lot of time to plan, and you have to optimize for your production, and you don't have the time to think in the future. Sometimes it'll be really weirdly jarring. With Friendship is Magic, you'll have a lot of situations where they got the opportunity to go back and redo some of the old models, and then you see the difference between the old models and the new ones. For example, you had the Golden Oak Library, or just Zecora's Hut. Just between season 1 and season 5, the difference in quality is incredible. And unfortunately, couldn't go back and just swap the models because it's already been done. So the one thing I'm thinking of in conclusion is that animation errors are going to be a thing that will keep happening because of the strict production schedules we have. Lots of people who don't have a lot of time to communicate, to fix things, because it's not the priority in that kind of production. You don't have a lot of time to think. You have to deliver. So that kind of animation error will keep going. And I think one of the things that's interesting, for example, with Derpy Hooves, Jazz Hooves, they're probably not related, but when you look back at this, I'm really glad that the fandom took an enjoyment of it, took fun of it, instead of just pointing to the artists and just calling them lazy because they think that animation errors are somehow a reason of laziness, rather than the fact that that kind of scheduling is just incredibly stressful. And the one thing I'm also calling for is just for people to just be accepting. Just sometimes you'll have productions that will take a bit longer because they have to fix things, because they have to keep going. The saying that goes with the industry is usually just make it work, because we have sometimes weirdly crazy situations of situations where you have rigs that just explode, but you still have to make the deadline, and that's unfortunately a part of the industry. It's just the fact that that kind of production relies on, for example, Flash was never meant for that kind of show, but people made it work because that's what all we had until we got things, for example, like Toon Boom, TV Paint. Now we have Procreate Dreams, which is going incredibly well. People are loving it right now. But I think for a conclusion, I'd like to open up to a discussion and a Q&A if you have any animation error you want to talk about.
When it comes to, because like I said, we have a lot of stuff all the time, and kind of in crunch time, and I can understand that feel a little bit where it's like, okay, well, there's an acceptable threshold of stuff that we're kind of deal with. Is there like a sort of a fixed mentality of like, okay, well, here's a bunch of issues we have. We can take a marker and go, well, we need to get these ones taken care of, but these ones are so small, like you're saying, the eyelash clip, where it's, they're blinking. I would pick that, whereas like your animators are used to seeing that, but absolutely pick out, versus say something a little bit bigger, like some face being rotated around, right? Is there that line of, say, acceptable mistake threshold kind of thing? I'm not explaining.
One of the things we usually describe, because we had sometimes error that would pop up, we call them CBBs, could be better. And the whole idea with that is that we set them as lower priorities if we had any time that we could set to fix those. And sometimes we realize that it's not... The way we realize is that sometimes we don't have the time to fix that kind of thing, and people will just be accepting. It's things that also show up at repeated viewings, and sometimes the whole idea is that we see the clip looping on basically a view that we can zoom in, so we can spot mistakes because they keep looping and looping and looping. Sometimes they don't even show up when you look at them in context, because your eye is basically facing the other side of the screen. It's definitely an order priority, because we have a specific amount of time we can dedicate, because of course we don't want people to do overtime just to fix mistakes that, like, people have families, they have and we've heard all the horror stories of people having to do overtime just to get something going, and the toll it's done on their families, their marriage, it's just a lot. So having that kind of a priority list of things that they can fix, and sometimes it's they realize that the problem is structural. So one of the things that they can take is not fixing it right now, but finding a way to fix it in new productions. For example, if you realize that the eyelash clipping is only on one character, you could always, for example, the default blink, reanimate it so you don't have the clipping issues. Sometimes you might have a fix in the way it's rendered, so the eyelash would never clip because it's rendered separately. Sometimes it's just taking lessons from productions and just keeping going, because a lot of it is just realizing that you need to keep going to get... You don't want to be the studio that just fixes their old stuff just to show that they fixed it and then just to try to get new clients, because a lot of it is bidding. You have lots of studios that have to compete, and unfortunately the problem is that you have lots of studios who have to bid. They basically say, like, we can deliver this style for this amount of money, and then a studio says, like, I would like to do that, but could you do it cheaper? And then the studio is just thinking, like, we could try, and then you realize that the studio is basically trying to gamble to get it working, because the studio needs clients, and the clients basically want to spend as little as possible. And unfortunately, it's the kind of mentality that's hard to get out of, because it's structural. It's definitely a lot of people who have It's lots of people who have different interests. For example, Hasbro is seeing the show as simply advertisement for their toys, while you have creators who think like, I would like to make a piece that I can show to prove that I can do things, and then you realize that they put a lot of work. Sometimes they'll take overtime just to prove that they can do that. And the problem is that then the animation studio looks at that and says like it took 56 hours to do. That's because that's the timesheet have been given that took the artist 56 hours to get that, and then they look at that and think, well, it's going to take 56 hours to do the same thing again, and then they realize, oh, it didn't take 56 hours, it took 76 because it took 20 hours just overtime that they didn't report, and unfortunately it keeps going and going and going, and you have artists who then have to figure out how to get it working. And sometimes it'll be very clever because the saying goes, work smart, not hard. So sometimes we have very good optimization tricks. For example, all the white walk cycles for the ponies are already pre-built. And that really helps because having characters just walking as they talk is a lot more visually interesting than just characters talking and, instead of walking, just cutting from shot to shot. And one of the problems with that is that then you have to make a whole library of other characters whenever they walk. You have to figure out how they will walk if they have different anatomies. For example, Luna, Celestia, they have completely different body types, and you can't just transpose them because Flash is not built for that. So you have to find clever ways. One of the clever ways I found is the stallion walk cycles sometimes will just be copied directly from the mares, and you don't notice too much because the body types are not too different. One of the funniest examples I can think of is, I remember the fat pony from not Rarity's Boutique, it was King Charlotte Boutique. When you had Rarity just showing all the dresses to regular ponies, and you had a giant pony who was basically 3 times the size of all the other ponies, just walking by and just asking like, do you have the moon dress that she was talking about? The funniest bit of that is I was looking at a walk cycle. They just took a regular mare walk cycle, they took the legs out of it and just transposed it to the different body. So it just feels like it's kind of a Flufflepuff situation where you have a really, really big body but tiny legs. And it looked really funny, and I'm really glad that they went with that because trying to animate a whole new cycle for a whole new body type would have been a nightmare for everybody. Especially with the later seasons, you had characters with completely different body types in terms of faces, and the problem with mouths is that they also reuse mouths whenever you have characters talking, and it's very helpful because scenes of characters talking are a lot easier to animate than scenes of characters doing things. But the problem is that if you have a completely new set of mouths to redo, it is going to be a nightmare. So the fact that they had to introduce that, then you have new species. For example, the griffins that had completely different mouths, the changeling as well, and basically all of that you had to figure out to keep going, especially while they had to keep the budget. It also really helps that MLP, since the show was done in Flash, you could reuse a lot of assets that they did. It's not like the back in the old days of cell animation where you had a whole background and you could only have it from one angle and you couldn't really zoom in because it was physical, so you couldn't just physically enlarge it. So just having, for example, with MLP, just being able to reuse pieces all over the place that you just built in earlier seasons was extremely helpful. So it really helped the artists to actually focus on the art, and of course they kept making animation errors, but that's due to just the idea of having one studio that subcontracts another studio to do the rest of the work, and then you have back and forth between the 2 studios. Sometimes you'll have someone who just has to fix it themselves instead of sending it to someone else, and some studios will have the idea that you fix only the things that are to your department. For example, studio that does modeling but doesn't let their texture artists fix any modeling issues, which is quite a pain because some artists, what they'll have, for example, they do texturing for a model, but they realize the model has issues with, for example, edge loops where is gonna wrap really weird with the UVs. You're gonna get really weird stretching. So they have to send it back to the modeling artist to put back the edge loops instead of just doing it in 2 clicks. So it's quite a pain because it's quite a lot of communication. It's back and forth, which takes time, and that time is time that could be better spent fixing errors or improving animation or just making it just something better. So it's quite interesting. It's also the idea that you have lots of people from different departments, and sometimes they don't even have the skills to fix other things that they could catch. For example, I could spot animation errors, but I don't really have the knowledge how to fix that kind of animation because they use different tools. So I basically have to point it to someone, and you say, "Oh, okay, I see it. I don't have any time to fix it." So you're stuck in that kind of situation where we love to have more time, but it's unfortunately seen less of it as an art and more as a market, more a production workshop that you have to keep going. So it's not fun for a lot of people because they want to get something really good, because a lot of artists, some people only do it for the money, but lots of artists want to make people appreciate it. They want something that they could watch with their family, their friends, and just say like, "I did that." I remember when I was an Aquaman, just with my mom, just saying like, "My scene's coming soon," and then when it came, I just it just felt really good to just be able to show the kind of work that I could do. But sometimes you don't have the means to do it, which is quite a shame. Sometimes you don't have the rendering capabilities. For example, with Make Your Mark, you'll notice that it's especially noticeable in episodes like Winter Wish Day. You had lots of scenes with just street lights, and the whole idea was that the lights are supposed to be different colors, but you'll notice that they don't actually glow on anything because the lights are not, they're basically set as emissive, but the nature of the ray tracing they could afford with that kind of production, because they have to make for maybe like 300 minutes worth of animation, maybe even more, because of they have lots of episodes they have to do. So they don't have a lot of rendering budget, so all the lights, the lights work, they basically just emit one bounce and it doesn't do anything else. You have specular reflection, but you don't have any diffuse reflection. So everything is lit really weirdly, and it gives something that looks a bit more flat than the movie. And then you have lighting artists who basically have to cheat a lot of lighting to try to make it a bit more punchy, more cinematic. And you compare back and forth and you feel like something is up. You also have, for example, the mains. One of the main difference between the movie mains and the show mains is that the movie mains were actually simulated. For example, if I go with that and I keep, you feel like every strand moves a bit on its own. And one of the problems is that simulating all the strands on their own is quite a lot. You have some artists who are just paid just to do the simulations, and if the hair just starts to behave weird, they have to fix it. But on a TV schedule, you have lots more shots to do. So what they do is that basically the mains are animated. They have a little parent bone, and basically the bone just twists all the hair. It's very noticeable, for example, with Misty, because all her hair is it goes in all the directions, but when it moves, it just follows one, and that's it. All because they don't have the budget to do something fancier. And it's not just Make Your Mark. Whenever you have a CG movie that just gets translated to a TV show, they'll have to downgrade the hair, they'll have to downgrade the lighting, just because they have to keep going with the budget they have. And with TV, they don't have as much budget because the advertisement revenue is not as big as the movie revenue. And of course, they can't just keep making movies, because movies are also like, they have massive budgets, and sometimes it could be a flop. And it's quite a lot. And of course, with TV, we have lots of things that we can do that movies can't. We have a lot more running time, so we can do a lot more character development. And we can also afford with TV to have things just going slower than movies, because movies will have like 90 minutes to get everything going, and you'll want to give a lot out of it. So with TV shows, you can do stories just span a lot of episodes, and in those episodes you finally have the time to slow down a bit. And you might not have the best budget to pull things off, but you have lots of opportunity for character development because you have a lot more running time to go with it. So it's I wouldn't call it like it's not like one is superior to the other. It's just that we have to go with realizing that we have constraints because of the nature of the format. It's not as bad nowadays because we have lots of productions for TV where they have the budget of whole movies, and unfortunately they have the whole budget of movies, but they're also told like we have 6 or 8 episodes for a season and that's it, and then you have writers trying to scramble to get something that just works with 6 or 8 episodes, and then you're being told later, yeah, we're getting only 2 seasons and that's it. So it's quite painful in terms of production. So any other question, discussion? Because I'm starting to not talk about animation errors at all, just talking about the weird nature of TV productions. Do we have a lot of time left? I do technically have 3 minutes left for the panel. Actually, technically I started a bit late, so I do have like 8. And technically they can't kick me out because there's nothing else happening after, so what are you gonna do? Yeah. Ooh, you know my weakness. Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least I don't have anything with sound right now. Later, I'm going to have a panel where I talk about fan animation, how you can become a fan animator. It's a bit less stressful than working in the industry. So I can talk a bit about the just getting started with software, like Blender and all. I will have some new previews to show the project I've been working on. It's a 12 minutes long fan animation with lots of things. We have 3D environments of massive scale. I was trying to get something that looks a bit more like the movie with lots of interesting shading, more interesting composition technique than the show. And I'm really excited to show you what it looks like so far. So if you have any questions or anything you want to cover for the just the ending of just to end the panel on an interesting note, do you have anything else?
Have you ever had it where you find an error in the project and you find it actually comes out of it and you say, let's go forward?
Oh, I've had that. I had the discussion. I can't really talk too deeply about the element I've been working on because it was under NDA. But I was describing to my supervisor, I was just saying like, this would work better if we had that asset separately, because we don't have to worry too much about because doing the 2 assets separately would be easier just to handle, and then we can send the part that's already fixed, we already know is going to work to surfacing, and then they can work on their own thing and then work on the weird part separately. And I kept going like, yeah, we could do it like that. It's much easier for you. It's much easier for me. We're only going to be needed for a couple of shots anyway, so let's separate it. And then he says, no, let's not do it like that. And then eventually he realized, yeah, let's do it like you said. Took like a month. Of course, I was working on other things on the side, but it took about a month for him to go back to me and say, yeah, let's do it separately. It's going to be much easier.
Being told, you're right, and the 11th hour is always the greatest thing.
Yeah, it's one thing to be told you're right. It's another thing to be told you're right, but you also have to fix the
You're right, be more work.
yeah. It's definitely one of those things. There's different ways to go with problems, and sometimes you won't go with the best solution. Sometimes you'll go with the second best because you don't know any other way to approach the best solution. You either don't have the skills or you don't have the experience with that. I was just looking at the MLP rigs. The approach that they had for those was genius compared to other productions at the time, and I think part of it is just because of all the experience they had on previous productions, realizing like this is the way to go. Let's do it like that, and it just looks incredible now. So A lot of it is experience. A lot of it is also accepting that you don't know all the answers, and to just accept that sometimes you'll have someone just giving you a better approach, and just saying, yeah, let's go with it. A lot of it in animation is already trust. You have the NDAs, or you have to expect everybody to keep their secret. Part of it is the fact that the NDA is very strict. You'll get sued to oblivion if you break it. You'll have so that's why you have lots of production where you just know absolutely nothing, even though there's 1,000 people in the credits of that production. So just for example, with special effects in movies, sometimes you can't even say the movie you're working on, because the studio that does the special effects, like, people know what company you're employed for usually, but the studio that does the special effects for that movie cannot say what movie they've worked on yet, because they haven't said it explicitly. I've heard some horror story of someone just saying what production they were on the day before it was revealed, and just being told, pack your boxes, you're out, just because of that. So you have to be very strict. You have to be very careful. For example, just the idea of getting hacked. So we have security measures for that. Password changes. Just the fact that whenever you're working now with remote work, you have if you have someone who's working, who's living with you, they can't even be in the same room as you're working. During the couple of months ago, I was visiting my mom, and I had my little desk when I was working. I was just telling my mom, like, you can't go in yet, I'm working. And just to give you the idea of how strict it was, and you have to be careful. You can't keep any record of your work, which is quite a lot of trouble, because you need to prove the work you've done, and sometimes you have productions where the work you've done is very blurry in the background, so you have only that as a reference when you're doing a reel of your work. Sometimes you'll have the studio that just has a reel that they've been able to negotiate with the studio that's been contracting them, just telling them about, we can let you do a nice behind the scenes of the special effects you've done for the movie, but you can't release it yet. You have to wait like 3 weeks after the movie releases to show the work you've done. You can't show this element, you can't show this element, and they have those very strict things. And then you have, unfortunately, you have lots of directors. It's more in the special effects industry that's a problem, but I'm pretty sure the animation industry would have similar issues too. You're going to have some directors who say, like, this production doesn't have any computer effects involved. And you'll have, for example, Oppenheimer. They said, like, there's no computer effects whatsoever. And then you look at the credits and you see, like, a lot of names of special effects studios that only do that kind of special effects. And then you realize, like, yeah, I've been fooled. Because the problem with special effects is that if you do a really good job, nobody knows that you've done it. So it's quite a lot. It's also the fact that directors lie about it. Sometimes it's quite weird, you have productions where they have blue screens, but they ask the photographer of the sets where you have the blue screen to grade the blue screens instead, because it looks a bit gross visually, because it's supposed to stand out so you can actually key it properly. But they basically ask, like, gray out the blue screen. And sometimes you'll have elements just digitally taken out because they need to keep it secret. So it's quite a lot. It's a lot of culture of trust, culture of secrecy. It's and people look at it, and we can't really afford to really let secrets go out, because if you get spoilers for some movies, sometimes you'll be less tempted to go see that movie. Sometimes not, but the general vibe is that if you get told what the movie is going to be about, and all its secrets, you'll be less likely to go see it because you've been sold a punch. So, and that's the thing. And unfortunately, the studio really requires people to, the studio needs people to go see the movie to get ticket sales, because they need to fund this. And for TV, they also need people to watch it on TV because of the TV rights with the advertisement as well. So you can't really afford to have someone just show the work right before it's been released. And sometimes you can't even afford to show it after, because sometimes you'll have secret elements that you don't want to cover yet. So it's really weird culture of secrecy that's really interesting. And unfortunately, for example, Scoob Holiday Hunt was a movie I worked on for 8 months. I cannot show a single frame or talk about, well, unless, besides the things that have been already given out, but I can't talk about the script. I can't show the work that I've done. I basically have to tell people, trust me, I worked on it. It was great, in my opinion, but there is no way for you to prove it. So sorry. Yeah, and I hope that it doesn't become a recurring pattern that you have lots of production where the work just gets shelved because it's not financially responsible. I also looking, for example, sometimes you have canceled productions. For example, we have no idea if Make Your Mark is going to get a second season, and it's quite a shame because they've done a lot of work that could be reused, and we could. I think there's lots of potential for a second season. There's lots of story elements that could be explored, and really I liked it. Like, it's not on the level of the movie, but it's something that I've been enjoying watching with my mom. And sometimes I just point to things like, I know how they did that. For example, the clouds. One of the restrictions that they had with the TV show is that rendering clouds is a lot of rendering challenge because the volumetrics just in terms of scale just massively explode. So for all the clouds that they have whenever you have a scene where they're flying, it's just pictures of clouds that are facing the camera and they're just flying fast enough that you don't notice it. And it works. And it's not like it's not like TV shows are the only one doing that. There's movie productions where you just go with pictures of clouds and nobody notices. It just looks incredible.
Back to that, like, that kind of expands into filmography or anything like that. If it serves the purpose and you're not going to see it, why are you going to go hard on it if it's saving some time?
Yeah. And you also have the diminishing returns. Sometimes you'll put more and more money to your picture and just doesn't look that much better. For example, I was looking at the budget for Endgame, and I think the whole budget of Endgame, within 10 seconds of that movie, you have more money than the budget of one episode of MLP. And I was thinking, like, MLP did some incredible thing with that little budget. So you see a bit the reason why you have massively bloated productions that just fail to wow people because they just think that adding more and more money will do something. So, and it's also the fact that the more money you put, the more people are involved, and the more people are involved, the more you'll have to play safe to make sure that everybody can work in a concise manner. For example, if you have really weird rigs that you need to explain to people, and you don't have a lot of people involved, you can have the person just giving the speech, explaining all the intricacies, and have hands-on experience of just explaining to, like, for example, if you have to fix things, you can explain his vision to those few people, and that's it. But if you have 100 people who have to work with it, you'll have 100 people who you'll need to give feedback to and to explain how to make it work. So you'll have that kind of crazy production. It's a bit why you can't just fix animation errors just by putting more people. You'll have to explain the pipeline, and pipeline is a crazy thing. It's not even the same between studios. Sometimes they'll have completely different tools that they have to work with, and then you'll have the people who come from different studios. They have lots of experience in the things that they have in common, but the tools that they have to explain because they're different. So yeah, it's quite crazy. It's weird industry that just makes sense when you're in it, but it's just a circus when you look at it from the outside. So yeah, I am 10 minutes over my time, so I don't want to take too much time from you. I'll be outside if you have any questions that are more specific. I got a panel at I don't have the time on my. I think it's supposed to be at 8 or 9. It's called Fan Animation Workshop, where I'll show a bit of fan animation, and I'll be demonstrating some of the tools live since I got my laptop to show it. So I'm pretty excited. So I'll see you around, and I wish